The winner of the UFC 320 main event next weekend between Alex Pereira and Magomed Ankalaev, I think they know who their next opponent is already. And I believe that that is none other than the Black Jag himself, Carlos Ulberg, because he just picked up his 9th consecutive victory, and he did it in front of the Perth, Australia crowd in his first ever UFC main event, and he knocked out a former title challenger in Dominick Reyes in the process. March 6th of 2021, UFC 259. That is the last time that Carlos Ulberg has tasted defeat, and since then he has tallied off 9 consecutive victories in a row, with 6 of them by way of stoppage, and that includes his 4-minute and 27-second knockout in the first round over Dominick Reyes the Devastator, who was on a 3-fight knockout win streak in his own right heading into UFC Perth. And now all of a sudden Carlos Ulberg is starting to put together a pretty impressive resume in the 205-pound division, because he has a 12-second knockout over perennial top 15 ranked Alonzo Minifield. He has decision wins over former title challenger Volkan Oezdemir and former champion Jan Blachowicz, and now another knockout, and this time against a former title challenger in Dominick Reyes. And that 9-fight win streak that Ulberg currently sits at, it is leaps and bounds ahead of anyone else in this light heavyweight division. As a matter of fact, there's no one else having the success that Carlos is having right now except for the champion in this weight class, Magomed Ankalaev, because the light heavyweight champion is currently on a 14-fight unbeaten streak, and similar to Ulberg, has not tasted defeat since his UFC debut. And we know that in under a week's time, in the main event of UFC 320, Ankalaev will be having his rematch with Alex Pereira for the light heavyweight championship of the world. And if he can go 2-0 against Poatan, I believe that Carlos Ulberg will be his next opponent. And Ulberg even said in the aftermath of this performance against Reyes that he is looking to get on the phone with the UFC brass, get a flight booked to Vegas, and be front row ready to challenge and call out the winner of that main event. Now, heading into the event on the preview show Friday, I said that it wasn't necessarily a guarantee that the winner of Ulberg versus Reyes would be the next #1 contender, and that is because at UFC 320, we know that Jiri Prochazka and Khalil Roundtree Jr. are also facing off against one another in the featured bout. Jiri, of course, being a former champion in the weight class, and Khalil being a former title challenger, there are massive stakes in that bout. However, both of them have had recent opportunities to become champion, and both faltered at the hands of Alex Pereira, whereas Carlos Ulberg is a newcomer into title contention, and now pairing that newcomer status into the title discussion talk with this outstanding performance against Reyes with a 9-fight win streak, I believe that he is now undeniable. And yes, of course, I mentioned earlier that Carlos Ulberg has finished 6 of his 9 wins over the course of this win streak, but he was yet to have that true coming out party moment against a notable name in the top of the division, and that is exactly what this was against Dominick Reyes here. So he has now done everything there is to do in order to earn a championship fight. Now it's just a matter of who will he face. Will it be Magomed Ankalaev, or will it be Poatan Alex Pereira? But do you agree with me in the sense that Carlos Ulberg is the new #1 contender in this light heavyweight division, hands down, regardless of what happens between Prochazka and Roundtree Jr.? So I want to hear from you down in the comments below if you agree with me regarding Carlos Ulberg being the new solidified #1 contender, or do you still think that there is a world where it could be the winner of Prochazka versus Roundtree Jr.? And of course, I guess we still have to mention that it is a possibility that Pereira can dethrone Ankalaev, and then they would be one apiece and potentially line themselves up for a trilogy. But I guess we just have to wait and see what happens at UFC 320 to answer a couple of those other questions. But let me know what you would do if you were the UFC brass down below. As for the rest of the UFC Perth card, there are a couple of other performances that I want to give some shine to, and we head to the co-main event first, where we saw Jimmy the Brute Crute at 29 years young pick up his 2nd consecutive first-round submission victory. In July at UFC 318, it came against Marcin Prachnio, and here at UFC Perth, it came against Ivan Ursulan, who now moves to 0-3 in the UFC. And we talked about in the preview of this card the lack of success that Jimmy Crute would have between April of 2021 and February of this year, but he has righted the ship in his career right as he is getting ready to enter his prime, and I think it's now time for him to get another crack into the top 15 of this light heavyweight division. I think a perfect next opponent for Jimmy Crute would be a longtime veteran in Nikita Krylov, who currently sits at number 13 in the world, and it would be a fresh matchup and an opportunity for Jimmy to get back into the top 15 where he once was years ago. And for Nikita Krylov, he can prove that he still has gas left in the tank and to fend off surging prospects that are vying for his spot in the ranks. Not to mention, it would absolutely deliver in terms of an X's and O's perspective, because Jimmy Crute hardly ever goes to the scorecards, and when he does, it's typically a draw, and Nikita Krylov's finish to decision ratio is absolutely astronomical. The Haitian sensation Neil Magny, at 38 years young, is still getting the job done and still continuing to stack wins on top of his welterweight win record. And now for the second time in as many years, he goes into enemy territory and gets a third round come from behind victory via stoppage against a rising prospect. In 2024, it was Mike Malott in front of his Canadian home crowd, and now at UFC Perth, it was against Jake Matthews in front of his Australian home country. But I will say that this one does not come without some controversy, because earlier on in the fight, with just a second to go in the first round, if I'm not mistaken, because with just 1 second remaining in that opening round, Jake Matthews had Neil Magny in a deep guillotine choke submission, and it looked as though Neil was potentially on his way to going out. He extended his arm. It didn't necessarily go limp like we see from others that go to sleep via choke, and it's possible that he was just trying to create some space for himself to last out to the buzzer. However, the referee in the bout decided to jump in and call the fight off, and then the buzzer shortly followed suit, and so it looked as though Jake Matthews was able to get the first round submission win over the veteran Neil Magny. However, we would see that Neil Magny would immediately get up. He was not out cold, and he would protest the stoppage. But then something happened that we had never seen before, and the referee decided to just try and save his ass and say, "Oh, no, I didn't wave off the fight. I stepped in when the buzzer rang." And now fast forward a little over the halfway point of round 3, and Neil Magny gets the finish win over Jake Matthews when Jake Matthews had a victory stripped away from him from the referee. And Matthews has came out in the aftermath of this fight and already said that him and his team have appealed to the Australian Athletic Commission to get this ruling overturned in what would more than likely just be a no contest instead of a loss on his record and a win on Neil's. And it even states in the rulebook that a referee cannot restart a fight once they waved it off, and that is exactly what the referee in this bout did. So it'll be very interesting to see if we ever see this referee step into a UFC octagon again when they revisit Australia in the future. But I would love to get your thoughts and your opinions on this fight as a whole down below, on the Jake Matthews controversy, and of course for Neil Magny having yet again another comeback victory. Regardless of what you think should have happened at the end of round 1, you got to tip your hat to the veteran Neil Magny at the same time. 25-year-old lightweight Tom Nolan in front of his home country of Australia picked up his 4th consecutive victory, and he did it with a first round submission over Charlie Campbell, who was undefeated in the UFC heading into this fight. He is now 10-1 overall and has finished 6 of those 10 wins with 5 knockouts, and this was his first submission of his professional career, and the only loss on his resume was in his UFC debut in January of last year, where he would be finished by Nicolas Mata. The 2023 Dana White Contender Series contract earner may just be 1 or 2 more wins away from challenging a top 15 lightweight in his next outing, so this is definitely someone that you have to keep your eyes on moving forward into 2026. The Battle Giraffe Cameron Roston just fought on Dana White Contender Series on August 19th and got a first round TKO victory, and just a little over 1 month later he made his debut in front of his home Australian crowd against a veteran at this point in the UFC, a very successful veteran may I add, in Andre Petroski, and he went in there and knocked him out in the very first round, just 2 minutes and 41 seconds into the bout. The 30-year-old is right in his prime with a 13-3 record overall and has finished 12 of those 13 victories with 6 knockouts and 6 submissions. He is a well-rounded, versatile fighter, and this is a big performance and a big notch on your resume in just your first UFC fight to already get a victory over Petroski, who prior to this loss was 8-3 in the UFC and was right on the outside of looking in of the top 15 of the rankings, especially should he have beaten Roston here. But now all of a sudden it is the Battle Giraffe that finds himself on the outside looking into the middleweight top 15 after just 1 UFC bout. And earlier on in the night we saw another Australian UFC newcomer get a victory in their debut fight, and this time it was the heavyweight Brandon Perisic. The Balkan Bear is now 5-1 with a 100% finish rate and even has been finished in his lone loss. The man doesn't know what the judges' scorecards are, and he knocked out Elijah Ellison in the very first round 1 minute and 55 seconds in. And at 31 years old, the heavyweight division needs some new bodies and some life breathed into it, and this is exactly what we're looking for here, some Australian big boys entering the discussion. And last but not least, the very first fight of the night, we saw Alexia Tainara extend her win streak to 11 after picking up a victory over the 14th ranked strawweight in the world and longtime UFC veteran at this point, Loma Lookboonmee, and now sitting at 2-0 in the UFC. Come Tuesday morning, Tainara is already going to have a ranking next to her name in the strawweight division. division. And although she wasn't able to add a 9th submission victory to her resume, she was able to notch a very dominant one-sided fight in victory over Loma, and at 27 years of age, she is a very fun addition to the top 15 of the strawweight division that is starting to pick up right now. We've got the vacant title fight happening on October 25th between Virna Jandiroba and Mackenzie Dern. We've got ladies like Lupi Godinez and Jillian Roberson surging, and now add Alexia Tainara into the mix, who is a training partner and friend of fellow strawweight ranked fighter Amanda Hebos, sitting at number 11 in the division. I would love to see Tainara take on another longtime UFC veteran like Angela Hill, who sits at number 12 in her potential next fight. And maybe I'm getting a little too far ahead of myself, but I do believe that Tainara has some very high potential and a very high ceiling in this 115-pound division. She is definitely someone you have to keep your eyes on in 2026, because at the end of the year, if she keeps racking up wins, she could be in title contention. So that is it for the UFC Perth recap, and I want to get all of your thoughts and your takeaways on the card down in the comments below. Do you think that Carlos Ulberg is the light heavyweight #1 contender, or do you want to pump the brakes and see what happens in just a few days' time at UFC 320 in the light heavyweight championship fight between Ankalaev and Pereira and the featured bout between Prohaska and Roundtree Jr.? If you enjoyed this recap, please be sure to drop a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new, because we are on the road to reaching 1,000 subscribers before the end of the year, and we just have a little over 100 to go, and I believe that we can do it if we continue to build this community, and any and all support is greatly appreciated. Alongside weekly recaps of the most meaningful results in the aftermath of every card, I break down and preview the biggest and best fights and storylines heading into each weekend, and I give my thoughts and opinions on MMA news and fight announcements. You can also join the community on social media at Verbal Spar MMA on X, Instagram, and TikTok, as well as like the Facebook page Verbal Sparring MMA, and you can follow on your favorite audio listening platforms such as Spotify and Apple, where podcast episodes are released there every Monday and Friday. Have a great week, and I will see you all in the next video.